Cecily was a beautiful young woman nearing graduation, and she was not beautiful by chance. Cecily's appearance and popularity were her greatest sources of pride. She felt great pressure to be perfect, and all of this stemmed from her demanding mother's high expectations. Cecily's mother was a beautiful woman herself, but she frequently criticized her daughter and harshly pushed her to excel. No matter how well Cecily performed in school or socially, her mother made her feel inadequate. One morning, Cecily noticed a small red spot on her cheek. With a dab of makeup, it was gone, and she forgot about it until the following day. When she looked in the mirror that morning, she saw it had grown nearly 3 times in size overnight, and her skin was tight and dry. She gingerly touched it and winced with pain. She knew she'd have to ask her mother about it. Cecily may have been missing both of her eyes based on her mother's face when she saw her. She tried to play it off somewhat as Cecily's eyes welled with tears. "It's a boil, darling," her mother said. "You haven't been washing your face well enough." Cecily begged her mother to stay home from school, but the woman refused. She spent the entire day trying to hide the hideous boil on her face, feeling the eyes of her classmates on her at every second. The following morning, the boil was even larger in size, and the entire side of Cecily's face ached with a heavy pain. She went to her mother again, who looked at her with great disgust. "Perhaps I was wrong," she said. "It's not a boil, but a spider bite. It will heal by itself if you don't touch it," she said. "And if you tidied your room more often, you wouldn't have to worry about such pests." Cecily tried to tell her mother how painful it was and that she needed to see a doctor, but the woman refused. "If you pick at it, you'll have a horrible scar in the middle of your face," she said. "Can you imagine anything worse?" That night, Cecily took a long, warm bath to try and alleviate the discomfort. She soaked a cloth in the water and pressed it gently to her face, wincing but enjoying the heat. But as soon as she felt a bit of relief, the boil began to itch, and though she wanted to scratch it, she remembered what her mother had said. But as she dried herself off, the itching grew unbearable. She applied a bit of pressure, but it didn't help. Her skin was literally crawling, and she clenched her jaw and fists with all her strength to prevent herself from digging away at the damned spot. Cecily stepped in front of the mirror once again, wiping the tears from her eyes. Was it the welling of her eyes? Or had she just seen the slightest movement from the red spot? The pressure in her cheek only grew. If she was gentle, she told herself, she could help it to burst on its own. But as the unbearable, prickly tickling continued, she cared less and less about hypothetical scars. Finally, she couldn't take it any longer, and she pressed on each side of the boil with a single finger. Now, she was certain that it was moving, and she tried to guess what gross liquid would erupt from the swelling volcano on her face. She pressed a bit harder, and the pain throbbed through her temples, but she just had to. Splat! Horrifying brown goo splattered across the mirror as the boil burst open and a horde of venomous spiders poured out. Cecily tried to scream and brush them off, but they clung to her skin, biting her and filling her mouth, gagging and choking her. She stumbled from the bathroom and collapsed on the hallway floor, her body convulsing from the venom coursing through her veins. The spiders crawled under her eyelids and up her nose, filling her ears and burrowing into her brain, while some continued through the hallway and her mother's room. When the woman awoke from her nap and sat at her vanity, she felt a bit of soreness on her cheek. Looking closer at the reflection of her beautiful face, she noticed a small red spot.
Just right through here. We're almost there.
Carol and Harry excitedly entered the doors of Haddington Memorial Hospital to find the building mostly quiet. The bulk of the county was now routed to a newer medical building in Carpenter City, 20 minutes away without accounting for traffic. But this young couple planned to deliver their firstborn at Haddington Memorial, where they each began their own lives a few decades earlier, back when every room and hallway was bursting with patients and staff. The birth went smoothly, and Carol lovingly watched Harry nod off in the chair as the head nurse finished cleaning their fresh little one. The old woman wore a tight bun and cartoon print scrubs and hummed a bit to herself as she worked. She passed the baby to Carol, who sniffed the baby girl's warm head, adorned in a pink ribbon, and held her by the light of the flickering TV in the corner. A loud snore from Harry pulled Carol back from drifting off, and despite her best efforts to wake her husband, he continued to sleep like he'd been the one in labor. She pressed the call button for the nurse. A younger woman with long brunette hair came in quickly, shutting off the call button. Her uniform was closer to something like a candy striper would wear, and her clean tennis shoes lightly squeaked as she walked. She gently lifted the baby from its mother's arms and offered to take her to the nursery so Carol could rest, but the new mother wanted to keep her baby close and declined gratefully. The nurse lingered for a moment before she put the child in its basket and slipped from the room quietly. Carol had almost fallen asleep when the older woman knocked gently on the doorframe.
"Need something, hon?"
she asked. Carol thanked her groggily but said that they'd been taken care of. A few hours later, Carol woke to a shape standing over her. Harry was gone from his chair, but it wasn't him. As her eyes came into focus, she recognized the brunette nurse from earlier. In her hand, she held a large syringe, heading towards her baby's flesh.
"What are you doing?"
she asked. The startled nurse jabbed the poor baby's arm just enough to break the skin, letting the needle fall to the floor. She took the child from her basket, calming her, and apologized profusely. "Hepatitis," the nurse said with an awkward and hesitant smile. "Sorry to wake you, ma'am. They've got to get the shot within 24 hours.
"Let me have her, please?"
Carol asked. "I really upset the little thing," the young woman said, ignoring her and rocking with the baby towards the door.
"Please, give her to me now."
The nurse stopped, patting the cooing baby, and twisted her neck so she faced Carol. "Are you sure you wouldn't like me to take her to the nursery?" she asked again. Carol looked at the dot of blood on her poor baby's arm.
"Let's start with a bandage. Give her here,"
she stated with irritation. With a large smile, the nurse obliged and stepped from the room. Carol squinted at the clock. It was just after 1 a.m. Harry returned a bit later with a candy bar and soda, settling back into his chair and attempting to help his wife calm the baby, who continued to cry. They waited and waited and waited, but the nurse didn't return with a bandage. When Carol pressed the call button again, a small red light remained dark. She pressed it a few more times, but it seemed to have lost power. She asked Harry to go find someone. The nursery was starting to sound like a good plan after all. Harry returned with the older woman, who scooped the child up in her arms, quickly quieting her. Carol asked for a bandage, complaining about the other nurse. The woman offered a confused chuckle.
"Can't be surprised, I suppose,"
she said.
"Most everyone was either let go or moved to the new building downtown. The few of us left are stuck running around like chickens with their heads cut off."
With that, she passed the baby to its father and stepped out for a bandage. As soon as the child was in Harry's arms, she began screaming again. Harry looked at his wife with desperation, but Carol was equally distraught. Her head was heavy and throbbing. She needed silence, or something strong. But now it was the old woman who didn't return. They waited for nearly 20 minutes before Carol asked Harry to step out and find her.
"I'll be right back. Just try to relax."
The television was still flickering, and it was nearly 2 a.m. After more time passed, the brunette reappeared in the doorway holding 2 items, the now unnecessary bandage and a second syringe.
No, please, not right now. She's finally quieting down.
Carol pleaded. The friendly smile reappeared on the nurse's face. This one's for you, Mama. You both deserve to rest up tonight. Within seconds, whatever was added to Carol's IV transported her feet first into ice water. But her pores took in the cold and turned it to warmth and spread it through her sprawling veins like melting butter. The nurse plucked the baby from Carol's arms, now impossibly heavy, and moved across the room and out the door in a blur. The new mother was already too sedated to respond. She shook her head and took a deep breath, drawing all of her strength to press the call button, which lit up immediately. She watched the foggy shapes dancing on the TV as she waited, and finally the head nurse returned with a bandage.
Lots of noise coming from this room,
she said with a sweet grin that crinkled her face endearingly.
You need something?
Carol was fading fast.
My head
was all she could say. The woman shuffled to the foot of the bed and took a seat, placing her warm hand on Carol's shin. It weighed 1,000,000 pounds.
It'll be that way for a bit, but you'll get the hang of it all before you know it. There are lots of things that help him settle down. Mine always loved to be carried around. Works like a charm. Looks like she's gone for a walk with Daddy right now.
She looked at the empty crib.
I'm sure that little angel is fast asleep in her father's arms. Just let me know if you...
As she looked back at Carol, she noticed the confusion in her drooping eyes.
Honey, are you feeling okay?
Carol wanted nothing more than to give in to the drugs, but she took another deep breath and said,
Not Harry.
But the other woman didn't hear.
What was that, hon?
Carol needed a moment to find the energy to speak again.
Other nurse.
The low throbbing returned to the back of Carol's skull as she pressed herself to stay awake, and waves of nausea were getting worse.
Why don't I go and find them for you, huh? That'll make you feel better.
Finally, Harry reappeared in the room.
I can't find a damn soul in this place.
He began before noticing the nurse's presence. But she hadn't heard him. She only noticed that there was no baby in his arms. In 1 second, the blood drained from her face.
Where's the baby?
Harry asked. Carol was nearly unconscious. Her voice was low and flat.
The other nurse. In the nursery,
she said. The old woman stood up without saying a word, removed the phone from its cradle on the wall and dialed 2 numbers. She mumbled into the receiver as Harry took his wife's hands into his own.
Did someone give you some? I think she's been drugged.
He looked to the nurse who had just hung up the receiver. The woman was trembling and audibly swallowed the lump in her throat.
Sweetheart,
she said, eyes filling with tears.
The babies always stay with their parents. We don't have a nursery.
A security guard entered the room as Harry shouted something, but Carol no longer understood. She could see only the blurry shapes of movement around her and hear the echoing cries of her husband screaming as she drowned into herself. The hospital was locked down and searched, but no traces of the mysterious nurse or newborn were located. Once the old nurse was cleared to leave, she walked softly through the automatic doors and towards her car in the back of the lot. Her breath lingered in front of her like mist. It had snowed overnight before chilling over, and there was a thin layer of frost across the lot. She noticed her footprints behind her, adding the first blemishes to an otherwise unbothered corner. A ray of sun poked through the clouds, and she caught a glimmer just a few feet away. There was another set of tracks in the parking lot, after all, heading from the building to the edge of the asphalt and disappearing into the grass. The woman's eyes continued towards the trees in the distance, where a tiny bit of color stood out. Among the leafless branches and dead plants was a bright, shiny, pink ribbon waving in the wind. What good would Walter be? He can't help row the gondola,
said Angela. We were talking over our planned visit to PODOLO the next day. And what will he say? I asked. If he comes back from his business and finds no wife to welcome him.
On the contrary,
said Walter.
I've often wished such a thing might happen.
And so, after much discussion with this lately married, charming, devoted couple, we agreed that PODOLO should be the goal for tomorrow's picnic. I felt rather silly, for everything I had said about PODOLO was merely conversational exaggeration, meant to whet their curiosity like a newspaper headline. And I knew that when Angela actually saw the dull little island, its stony and inhospitable shore littered with broken bottles and empty tins, she would think what a fool I was. So I took back everything I said, called my own bluff, as it were, and explained that I avoided PODOLO only because of its location. It was 4 miles from Venice, and if a boisterous wind picked up, as it sometimes did without warning, we should find getting home to be difficult. Next morning, in brilliant sunshine, Walter gulped down his breakfast and started for the station. I stood on the balcony watching his departure. It seemed hard that he should have to spend 6 hours in a stuffy train. PODOLO, I must say, was looking its best. Green, flowery, almost welcoming. We cast an anchor a few feet from the stony shore. Suddenly, Angela exclaimed,
"Why, there's a cat!"
Sure enough, there was. A little cat, hardly more than a kitten, very thin and scraggly, standing on the weedy stones at the water's edge. It was a pitiful sight.
Oh, it smelt the food. It's probably starving.
The poor beast,
cried Mario, the gondolier.
Its owners did not want it. It's been put here on purpose.
The idea that the cat had been left to starve caused him no great concern, but shocked Angela profoundly.
How abominable! We must take it something to eat at once.
I thought we might wait till the meal was over. The cat would not die before our eyes, but Angela could handle no delay, and the gondola was turned to land. Meanwhile, the poor thing meowed regularly, though it had retreated and was almost invisible, a thin wisp of tabby fur against the parched stems of the outermost grasses. Angela filled her hand with chicken bones and stepped delicately onto the slippery boulders.
If I can catch it, we'll take it to Venice. Left here, it'll certainly starve.
I watched her approach the cat. It ran away, but only a few yards. She threw a bit of food, and it came nearer, another, and it came nearer still. It grew less suspicious. Its tail rose in the air, and it came right up to Angela's feet. She pounced, but the cat slipped through her hands like water. Again, hunger overpowered mistrust. Back it came. Once more, Angela made a grab at it. Once more, the cat eluded her. But the third time she was successful. She got hold of its leg. It wriggled and squirmed and fought and made the angriest, wickedest sound I ever heard. Instead of growing louder as its fury mounted, the sound decreased in volume, as though the creature was choked by its own rage. The spitting died off into the thin ghost of a snarl, hardly more audible than the hiss of air from a punctured tire.
Poor beast. She ought not to treat it like that.
His face gleamed with satisfaction when, intimidated by the whirling claws, she let the cat drop. It streaked away into the grass, belly to the ground.
I nearly had it. I think I shall throw a coat over it next time.
Angela climbed back into the boat and ate her asparagus in silence. I began to wish we hadn't come to PODOLO. It was not the first time a picnic there had gone badly.
I tell you what, if I can't catch it, I'll kill it. I could do it quite easily. It's only a question of dropping one of these boulders on it.
Mario was horror-struck. Starvation was in the course of nature, but to deliberately kill it?
It may be a messy business, but it'll soon be over. Poor little thing. Such a horrible life.
But we don't know that, I urged. If it could speak, it might say it preferred to live at all costs. But I couldn't move Angela from her purpose.
Let's go explore the island until it's time to bathe. The cat will be over its fright by then. I promise I won't murder it, except as a last resource.
The word murder lingered unpleasantly in my mind. You couldn't imagine a better place for one. The water was so warm one hardly felt the shock of going in. The only drawback was the mud, which clung to Angela's white bathing shoes. Nasty, sticky stuff. A little wind had got up, but the grassy rampart sheltered us. We leaned against it and smoked. Suddenly I noticed it was past 5. We ought to go soon, I said. We promised to meet Walter's train.
All right,
said Angela.
Just let me have a go at the cat first. We'll put the food out and watch.
There was no need to watch, for the cat appeared at once. Angela and I stole up behind it, but I inadvertently kicked a stone and the cat was off like a flash. Angela looked at me reproachfully. I retreated a few yards, but the cat, no doubt scenting a trap, refused to come out. Angela threw herself on the pavement.
I can see it. Give me 3 minutes and I'll catch it.
3 minutes passed. I felt concerned for Angela, her lovely hair floating over the dark hole, her face as much as one could see of it a little red. The air was getting chilly. Look here, I said. I'll wait for you in the gondola. When you've caught it, give a shout and I'll have the boat brought to land. Angela nodded. She dare not speak for fear of scaring her prey. From the gondola, I could just see the line of Angela's shoulders. Mario stood up, eagerly watching the chase.
She loves it so much that she wants to kill it.
We ought to start, I called across the water. Walter will be waiting at the station and wonder what has happened. Her mind was clearly on something else.
Oh, he'll find his own way home.
More minutes passed.
One must have patience with ladies.
I tried a last appeal. What luck, Angela? Any hope of catching him? There was a pause. Then I heard her say, in a curiously tense voice,
I'm not trying to catch him now.
We were irrevocably late to meet Walter, and the need for immediate hurry passed. Wrapped in a blanket to escape the winds, I fell asleep. Almost at once, it seemed, I began to dream. In my dream, it was night. We were hurrying across the lagoon trying to meet Walter's train. I stopped rowing and looked around. The seat behind me was empty. Angela! I cried, but there was no answer. I grew frightened. Mario! I shouted. We have left her behind. We must go back at once. The gondolier stopped rowing and turned towards me. I could just distinguish the wild look on his face.
We loved her, and so we had to kill her.
An uprush of panic woke me. I was restored to the sunshine. At least I thought so. In the ecstasy of returning to consciousness, I opened my eyes to the daylight, but they didn't receive it. I wondered if I was fainting, but a glance at my watch explained everything. I had slept past 8 o'clock. Mario slept on the deck. Before I had time to speak, he opened his eyes, like a dog.
You went to sleep, so I did too.
We both laughed. Is Angela asleep, or is she still trying to catch the cat?
That's where she was, but I can't see her now.
We strained our eyes towards the island, much darker than the surrounding sky, and called for her. There was no answer, no sound at all but the noise of the waves.
The cat wasn't big enough to hurt her, was it?
No, I said. It might have scratched her.
She was trying to kill it, wasn't she?
I nodded.
In this country, we are not accustomed to kill cats.
I asked him to call for her again. His voice was stronger than mine. Mario obeyed with a shout that might have raised the dead, but no answer came. Well, I said briskly, trying to conceal my agitation, we must go look for her. Mario didn't answer. Walter will be getting worried. I could not understand why Mario, usually so quick to execute an order, did not move. He was staring straight in front of him.
There's someone on the island,
he said at last.
but it's not her.
Mario bent forward and touched the ground with his free hand. It was a man, then? I asked.
I have a pocket knife, but the blade is only so long.
Within a couple of minutes, we had beached. Mario kept the oar in his hand. We were standing by the place where we had last seen Angela. The grass was broken and bent. She had left a handkerchief as though to mark the spot. Otherwise, there was no trace of her. He must have anchored round the other side, I said, but let's look here first.
It didn't walk like a man.
We climbed the grassy rampart and began to walk round the shallow curve, stumbling over concealed brambles. From our little eminence, we could see clusters of lights twinkling across the lagoon, but no boat. We stared at each other, bewildered. Are you quite certain it wasn't Angela you saw? I asked. How could you tell in the darkness?
She was wearing a white dress,
said Mario at last.
This one is in all black, and it looked like a man's head.
I felt a curious sensation in my spine. Mario, I said, do you think he's got anything to do with her not being here? Mario didn't answer. I don't understand why he doesn't speak to us.
Perhaps he can't speak.
Anyhow, we are 2 against 1. Come on. We soon lost sight of each other in the darkness, but I heard Mario swearing as he scratched himself on the thorny acacias. Right at the corner of the island, close to the water's edge, I found one of Angela's bathing shoes. She must have taken it off in a hurry, for the button was torn away. A little later, I made a rather grisly discovery. It was the cat, dead, with its head crushed. The pathetic little heap of fur would never suffer the pangs of hunger again. Angela had been as good as her word. I was just going to call Mario when the bushes parted and I was swept off my feet. Something hurled itself upon me, alternately dragging and carrying me until I was pitched into the gondola and felt the boat move under me. Mario! I gasped. We can't go away! The gondolier's white face stared silently. He was rowing with all his strength. The island began to recede. After a while, he sat down beside me and whispered,
When I found her, she wasn't quite dead.
I began to speak, but he held up his hand.
She asked me to kill her. Before it comes back, she said.
I looked behind us. Transparent darkness, save for one shadow that stained the horizon black. PODOLO. Mario bent his head nearer, but his voice was almost inaudible.
And then she said,
Speak up, I cried.
It is starving too. And it won't wait.
The Count and his wife went riding across the fresh snow, invincible and immaculate. He rode a gray mare and his thickest wools and flannels. She was wrapped in the glittering pelts of shiny black foxes, riding atop an equally dark mare, wearing shining boots with scarlet heels and spurs. No man had seen such snow in years, and when it ceased, the whole world was sparkling white. They each sat atop their beasts, looking at the blinding snow before them, so perfect, so pristine.
I wish I had a girl as white as snow,
said the Count, and they rode on. Eventually they came upon a deep hole in the snow, the site of some animalistic brawl or some other horrible act they cared not to think of. Yet the Count looked at the dark crimson stain and said,
I wish I had a girl with lips as red as blood.
And they rode on again. When they next stopped, they saw above them a large, beautiful black raven perched on a barren bough.
I wish I had a girl with hair as black as that bird's feathers.
As soon as the words left his lips and his foggy breath appeared before his face, there she stood. The girl had come to be right there beside the road. Perfect white skin, dark crimson lips, long, shiny, beautiful black hair, the exact child of this man's desire. She stood in the snow, stark naked, and the Countess hated her. The husband dismounted, wrapping the girl in his wool and lifting her atop his mare just in front of him on his saddle. The Countess had just one thought: how to get rid of her. So she dropped her glove into the snow. Young girl, please, get down and find my glove. She meant to gallop off and leave her there, but the Count said,
I'll buy you new gloves.
And they continued their journey. When they came upon a frozen pond, the Countess sprang the furs from around her shoulders and twined them round the naked girl's neck. Then she threw her diamond brooch through the ice into the frosty pool. Young girl, said the Countess, my diamond brooch. Please, sweet thing, dive in and fetch it for me. She meant for the girl to drown, but the Count said,
Not even fish will swim in such cold weather.
And they continued on. Sometime later, they came to a bush of roses, all in flower. The Countess removed her boots and forced them onto the girl's legs. Young girl, see those roses, she said. Pick me one. But the Countess was now bare as a bone, while the girl was warm in wools and fur and booted. The Count felt sorry for his wife.
I won't deny you that.
So the girl walked to the bush and picked the largest, most beautiful rose, which also had the largest, most horrible thorns, and pricked her finger. Bleeding and screaming, she fell into the snow. The Count, weeping, got off his horse and thrust himself upon the girl. The Countess reined in her stamping mare and watched him narrowly. Before her eyes, the girl began to melt. She grew lesser and lesser, until there was nothing left of her but the slightest bloodstain, like a feather a bird might have dropped, or the trace of a fox's kill in the snow. The Count delivered his wife her clothing, and she was warm again, and with a long hand she stroked her furs. Before mounting his mare, the Count picked up the rose, bowed, and offered it to his wife. But the woman wanted it not, as she did not want to be bitten. The sad man mounted his beast again, and the Count and his wife went on their way riding across the snow. So perfect, so pristine.
One night, when I was 6 years old, I awoke to find my mother standing over my bed, staring down at me with a creepy smile on her face. There was something wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was definitely something off. "Mom?" I said. "Yes," she replied. Her voice was flat, monotone. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Watching you sleep," she said. "Why?" But she didn't say anything more. I don't know how, but I knew without a doubt in my mind that whoever I was speaking to was not my mother. It stared down at me and I stared up at it. We maintained constant eye contact. Neither one of us blinked. We both knew that we were playing a game. It knew that I knew, and the trick was to see who would blink first. "Time for Betty Buys," it said. I didn't reply. I just kept staring. "Time to close your eyes," it said. "I'm not closing my eyes," I whispered. I fought against it for the longest time, straining every nerve in my body, desperately willing myself not to blink. Then, very carefully, without turning around or breaking eye contact, it reached behind itself for the closet door, sliding it open soundlessly. When it was fully open, it stepped backwards inside, settling back until only its smiling face and wide eyes were visible. Then, just as carefully, just as silently, it slid the closet door shut again. I lay there for a long time, silently trembling with fear. I kept my eyes trained on the closet door, watching for any sign of movement. Slowly, ever so slowly, I slid out of bed, keeping my eyes on the closet door. Cautiously, I took 3 or 4 steps to my right until I came to the bedroom doorway. Never for one moment did I take my eyes off that closet. Then I made a run for it. I sprinted across the dark hallway and into the safety of my mother's bedroom. She was lying there in her bed, sleeping peacefully. A wave of terror washed over me as my worst fears were confirmed. And only then did I allow myself to blink.
It was just 20 years ago, and I had been out all day hunting with no sport to speak of, and I had lost my way. It was not a pleasant place in which to lose one's way, with the first feathery flakes of a coming snowstorm fluttering down, and the evening closing in. Not the faintest sign of life met my eyes in any direction. There was nothing to do but walk on, and take my chance of finding shelter. The snow began to come down with ominous steadiness, and the wind fell. The cold became more intense, and the night came rapidly up. My heart grew heavy as I thought of my young wife watching for me through the window, and thought of all the suffering in store for her throughout this weary night. This morning, when we parted, she had implored me to return before dusk, and I had promised her that I would. Even now, weary as I was, I felt I might still get back to her before midnight, if only guide and shelter could be found. I stopped and shouted every now and then, but my shouts seemed only to make the silence deeper. I began to remember stories of travelers who had walked on in the falling snow until, wearied out, they were fain to lie down and sleep their lives away. A wavering speck of light came suddenly out of the dark, shifting, disappearing, growing momentarily brighter and nearer. Running toward it at full speed, I found myself, to my great joy, face to face with an old man and a lantern. "Thank God!" was the exclamation that burst involuntarily from my lips. Blinking and frowning, he lifted his lantern and peered into my face.
"What for?"
"Well, for you. I've been lost in the snow. How far am I now from town?"
"A good 20 mile, more or less."
"How about the nearest village, then?"
"About 12 miles the other direction."
"Where do you live, then? Please, let me go with you." The old man shook his head and rubbed his nose reflectively with the handle of the lantern.
"Ain't no use. The master won't let you in."
"Who is the master?" The gnome-like man was hobbling away through the falling snow. "You lead the way, and I'll engage that the master shall give me shelter."
"You can try him."
A large mass loomed up presently out of the darkness, and a huge dog rushed out, barking furiously. I drew up close behind him, and saw that the door was heavily studded with iron nails, like the door of a prison. Once inside, I found myself in a great raftered hall. One end was piled to the roof with corn, like a barn. The other was stored with flour sacks, tools, and all kinds of lumber, while overhead hung hams, baskets, and bunches of dried herbs. In the center of the floor stood a telescope of very considerable size, mounted on a rude movable platform with 4 small wheels. It was gauntly dressed in a dingy wrapping cloth, and just as I lifted the fabric for a look, a bell rang sharply.
"That's for you,"
said my guide, with a malicious grin. He pointed to a low black door at the opposite side of the hall. I crossed over and went in without waiting for an invitation. A huge, white-haired old man rose from a table covered with books and papers and confronted me sternly.
"Who are you? What do you want?"
I told him I simply sought sustenance and sleep.
"Jacob, how dare you admit this stranger?" "I didn't admit him, he shouldered his way in." "By what right have you forced an entrance into my home?"
The same that gives the right to cling to your boat when drowning. Self-preservation.
Self-preservation?
The snow would cover my body before daybreak. The man strode to the window, pulled aside a heavy black curtain, and looked out.
It is true. You may stay through morning.
With this, he waved me to a seat and resumed his studies. I placed my gun in a corner, drew a chair to the hearth, and examined my quarters. This room was carpetless. The walls were scrawled over with strange diagrams and covered with crowded shelves of philosophical instruments. On one side of the fireplace stood a bookcase. On the other, a small organ, decorated with painted carvings of saints and devils. I saw geological specimens, crucibles, and jars of chemicals, while on the shelf beside me, amid a number of small objects, stood a model of the solar system and a microscope. Every chair had its burden. Every corner was heaped high with books. The very floor was littered over with maps and papers. A dish of ham and eggs, a loaf of brown bread, and a bottle of sherry were placed before me.
"I have little to offer you. Your appetite, I trust, will make up for our deficiencies."
I protested, with the enthusiasm of a starving sportsman, that I had never eaten anything so delicious. He sat down to his own supper, which consisted of a jug of milk and a basin of porridge. We ate in silence, and when we had done, I drew my chair back to the fireside. My host, somewhat to my surprise, did the same.
"You are the first stranger who has crossed my threshold for more than 4 years. Will you favor me with a few words from the outside world?"
I encouraged his questions, and he leaned forward with his chin in the palms of his hands, stared into the fire, and proceeded. His inquiries related mainly to scientific matters, but I was no student of the subject. I was much relieved when he began pouring forth his own conclusions upon the facts which I had been attempting to place before him. I listened, spellbound. I had never heard anything like it then. I have never heard anything like it since. His thoughts poured in an uninterrupted stream from topic to topic, speculation to speculation, like an inspired dreamer. He spoke of the soul and its aspirations, of the spirit and its powers, of prophecies, of ghosts, specters, and supernatural appearances.
"The world rejects as false all that cannot be brought to the test of the laboratory. Show me any fact in physics, in history, archaeology, which is supported by testimony so wide and so various as the belief in apparitions. Yet he who believes is a dreamer or a fool."
He relapsed for some minutes into silence, then added,
"I was branded a visionary. Ridiculed by my contemporaries and banished from the field I'd given all my best years of life. Since then, I have lived as you see me now. The world has forgotten me, and I have forgotten the world."
He rose, as if desirous of ending the conversation, and went over to the window.
It has ceased snowing,
he observed, as he dropped the curtain and came back to the fireside. Oh, if it were only possible. But even if I could find my way, I could not walk 20 miles tonight.
Tonight? Are you so very anxious? What are you thinking of?
Of my wife, I replied impatiently, who does not know that I have lost my way. He asked from where I'd come and thought a moment. Then he smiled.
The night mail from the north changes horses there. They pass within 5 miles of this spot and will be due in about an hour and a quarter. If Jacob were to go with you, you could find your way, I suppose.
Easily. Gladly. He smiled again, rang the bell, gave the old servant his directions, and, taking a bottle of whiskey and a wine glass from a cupboard, he said,
The snow lies deep, and it will be difficult walking tonight.
I would have declined the spirit, but he pressed it on me, and I drank it. It went down my throat like liquid flame, and almost took my breath away.
It is strong, but it will help keep out the cold. And now you have no moments to spare. Good night.
I thanked him for his hospitality, and would have shaken hands, but he had turned away before I could finish my sentence. In another minute, Jacob had locked the outer door behind me, and we were out in the bitter cold. Not a star glimmered. Not a sound, save the crunching beneath our feet, disturbed the heavy stillness of the night. Jacob shambled on in sullen silence, his lantern in his hand, and his shadow at his feet. I followed. My thoughts were full of my late host. His voice rang in my ears and held my imagination captive. I strode on at the heels of my guide, absorbed and unobservant.
Yon's the old coach road. Keep the stone fence on your right.
And how far do I go before the crossroads?
About 3 miles. It's a fair enough road for foot passengers, but too steep and narrow for traffic. Mind where the wall is broken away near the signpost. It hasn't been mended since the accident.
What accident?
The night mail pitched right over it, falling 50 feet or so into the valley below. 4 were killed immediately, they say. The other 2 died the next morning.
How long is it since this happened?
Just 9 years.
Near the signpost, you say? I will bear it in mind. Good night. I tipped the man, and he thanked me before trudging back the way we came. I watched his lantern till the light disappeared, and then turned to pursue my way alone. How silent it seemed now, with only my footsteps to listen to. A strange sense of loneliness stole over me, and though I walked fast, I found it impossible to keep myself warm. I even breathed with difficulty, as though I was scaling the heights of some mountain. I was forced to stop for a few minutes and lean against the stone fence. As I did, I chanced to look back up the road, and there, to my infinite relief, I saw a distant light. It must be the carriage lamps of some private vehicle, though it seemed strange that any private vehicle should take a road known to be so dangerous. Unless I passed the crossroads by mistake, this was the coach I had come to meet. It came round the bend, and I jumped forward, waved my hat, and shouted. The coachman pulled up. The guard neither answered my hail nor made the slightest effort to dismount. The outside passenger did not even turn his head. I opened the door for myself and looked in. There were 3 travelers inside. I stepped in, shut the door, and slipped into the vacant corner. The atmosphere of the coach seemed colder than the outside air, and was pervaded by a damp and disagreeable smell. I looked at my fellow passengers, all 3 men, and all silent. How intensely cold it is tonight, I said, addressing my opposite neighbor. I saw that his eyes were turned full upon me, and yet he said nothing. The strange smell inside the coach was affecting me with an intolerable nausea. I turned to my left-hand neighbor and asked if he had any objection to an open window. He neither spoke nor stirred. I lost patience and let the window down. As I did, the strap broke in my hand, and I realized that the glass was covered with a thick coat of mildew. Now I saw that every part of the coach was in a condition of decay, crusted over with mold and literally rotting. I turned to the third passenger, and he looked me in the face without speaking a word. His face was livid, and his bloodless lips were drawn back as if in agony, showing gleaming teeth between. A dreadful horror came upon me. I turned to my opposite neighbor. He, too, was looking at me with the same stony glitter in his eyes. I passed my hand across my brow. The pale light played on their awful faces. The awful faces of the dead. Their hair, dank with the dews of the grave, and their clothes, earth-stained and dropping to pieces, and their hands were those of corpses long buried. Only their eyes, those terrible eyes, were alive, and they were all turned towards me. I shrieked as I flung myself against the door, and the coach reeled like a ship at sea. Then came a mighty crash, a sense of crushing pain, and then darkness. I awoke from a deep sleep and found my wife at my bedside. I had fallen over a precipice and had only been saved from certain death by landing upon a deep snowdrift. I was discovered at daybreak by a couple of shepherds who carried me to the nearest shelter and brought a surgeon to aid my broken arm and fractured skull. The place of my fall, I need scarcely say, was precisely that at which a frightful accident had happened 9 years before. I told my wife of the fearful events, but she treated the adventure as a mere dream born of the fever in my brain. Others may form what conclusions they please, but I know that 20 years ago, I was the fourth passenger inside the phantom coach.